It's game week, and it's not just any game week. It's an all Big Ten Rose Bowl for the Oregon Ducks and the Ohio State Buckeyes. Oh, and by the way, it's a playoff game. I've got the Buckeyes' number one concern this week, and the Ducks are chasing history you may not be aware of. Locked On Big Ten starts right now.
You are Locked On Big Ten, your daily podcast on the Big Ten Conference. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Big Ten. I'm Craig Sheeman, 40 years as a sports talk show host and play-by-play announcer, and I want to thank you for making us your first listen each and every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So, Oregon, Ohio State, game week, it is here, and Penn State, huge game, playoff game against Boise State. Plus, we'll catch up on the bowls since our last visit and my top 10 observations around the Big Ten over the weekend. But the game of the week is a rematch of the Big Ten game of the year when the Oregon Ducks hung on to beat the Ohio State Buckeyes by a point at Autzen Stadium back in October. It was great. It was a fantastic finish. Well, it wasn't great if you were a Buckeye fan. You needed about 1 or 2 more seconds. Then I think maybe you may have won the ball game there. But instead, it's an Oregon Duck win, and we await for the matchup. And we were kind of waiting for a Big Ten matchup, or a rematch, I should say, between these two in the Big Ten championship game, Oregon and Ohio State. But it never quite came to fruition as Penn State slipped in there ahead of Ohio State and took on the Ducks. Of course, the Ducks won. Their Big Ten champions. But the Ducks and the Buckeyes, they'll have their rematch after all with much higher stakes here, as the winner of the Rose Bowl matchup this week will head on and advance in the college football playoff and go to the semifinals. So how might things go differently this time than the high-scoring 1-point game that they had in their original game back in October? You know, off the top of my head, the Ducks will be just about at full strength in this matchup as they played that October game without their pass rusher, Jordan Burch, who was injured in practice that week just ahead of the Ohio State game. And remember, the Ducks played without wide receiver Trayshawn Holden in the second half because he got tossed for unsportsmanlike conduct. Meanwhile, some changes for the Buckeyes since that game in October. They've lost 2 starting offensive linemen since that game. In fact, left tackle Josh Simmons, he was lost for the year in that game against Oregon. And his backup suffered a season-ending injury. And starter Seth McLaughlin, he tore an Achilles the week of the Indiana game. So they've had to do a lot of shuffling around. And these injuries were problematic in the loss to Michigan at the end of the regular season. But head coach Ryan Day and offensive coordinator Chip Kelly, they seemed to figure things out with that extra week they had. And then they came out and had the blowout win over Tennessee in the first round of the playoffs. So they look good. If they could do that again against Oregon, they'll be much more successful. If they look like they did against Michigan, could be a tough day. So that's one thing we'll keep an eye on. And speaking of Chip Kelly, their offensive coordinator at Ohio State, you know, he says his guys are super motivated this week to get a second chance against the Ducks. Look, Ohio State feels like it's the better team. They feel like they went out there to Oregon on their turf, and if they hadn't botched that last second play, they were in field goal range, they would have won. Meanwhile, Oregon's going, yeah, well, you didn't win. We did. We're undefeated. We're number one. So both sides, I think, are looking forward to this matchup to really assert themselves and double down on how they feel about their team and their chances in these games, but in this game. So I will say this, that Chip Kelly did elaborate a little bit about his offense. They moved the ball great against Tennessee, but he admits it's going to be tougher to do against the Ducks. And he is concerned about the Ducks defensive line having Burch back in the lineup, putting pressure on against the Ohio State offensive line that's had to make some adjustments here on the fly late in the season. But Kelly noted that it's rare to get a rematch in college football. I mean, it happens, but it's somewhat rare. And he says he and Ryan Day and the staff have all watched film of all 13 Duck games, and they got it dialed in, and they feel like that they left some opportunities on the field in that Oregon game, which was, of course, a 32-31 loss. And we all remember the play where, Will Howard running down the field, going down, taking a knee, trying to clock it, and then looking up, and there wasn't any time left on the clock. And we all remember how Dan Lanning had eked out an extra few seconds by purposefully having a penalty the play before. We all know the story. It all came down to the wire. Both sides feel that they're on equal footing here, and they really want to play this game on a neutral site and go ahead and prove themselves. And certainly both sides, especially the Buckeyes, even though they lost in the regular season, they feel like they are good enough. This is their chance on a neutral field. As for the Ducks, the Big Ten champion Ducks, the undefeated Oregon Ducks, the undefeated and number one ranked Oregon Ducks, they are chasing history in addition to the national championship, currently at 13-0. And do the math with an expanded playoff format with additional games. If the Ducks win the title, they'll go to 16-0, which hasn't been matched since Yale went 16-0 back in 1894. My math isn't great, but I think that's 130 years ago. That's what kind of history we are dealing with the Oregon Ducks. This is what the Oregon Ducks are chasing here. Now, at the FCS level, North Dakota actually won with a 16-0 record just in 2019, 5 years ago. But an FBS football, like a 15-0 record, that's been achieved 4 times, including last year when Michigan did it, went 15-0 and won a natty. Georgia, LSU, and Clemson have all reached 15-0 since 2018, with the Ducks with a chance to do 16-0. Look, win or lose, there's a lot of football here for these college kids. And getting ready for this game, Dan Lanning has been very aware of his team's workload. In fact, leading up to this Rose Bowl, he's been practicing his team 3 days on, then a day off for weight training and rest, and then 3 more days on. He's trying to mix in some rest here. It's a long haul trying to go through 3.5 weeks in between games. My main concern is indeed the layoff. The Ducks have not played since December 7th in the Big Ten championship game and the January 1 Rose Bowl. That's 25 days in between games. Now, back in the day, and you may remember this too, the teams waited 25 days all the time before their January 1 bowl game. And in the days before conference championships, Big Ten and Pac-10 and Pac-12, the teams waited longer than that between their regular season finale at the end of November against their arch rival and then the Rose Bowl. So it can be done. It's like a full month off. And certainly the Ducks will be rested and healthy and fresh. But will the Buckeyes, have an advantage in that they lost to Michigan on that last weekend in November? Then they had their bye week, if you will, while the Ducks were getting ramped up for the Big Ten championship game. I think we'll see early on whether the Ducks are rusty or not. I would not expect them to remain rusty for very long. There's just too much talent on this football team. There's too much talent on both sides. I think both teams will put on a show. And if that means we have a slow first quarter, so be it. And that doesn't necessarily mean we will. But there's just too much talent around here. And we're going to keep previewing this game every day as we get closer and closer. And don't forget, we will go live. In addition to our regular podcast we do every day, we go live after big games. So we'll go live, Locked On Big Ten, January 1st, immediately following the Rose Bowl for reaction and analysis. So we will have all that ready to go. And I'm thinking that game's 5:30 game-ish Eastern time. That's a long game too. 9:30 Eastern time. We'll go live here on Locked On Big Ten. And we'll also start talking a little bit more tomorrow's podcast about Penn State and their Fiesta Bowl game against Boise State. We'd love to hear some of your early comments on all this. So the Rose Bowl, the Fiesta Bowl, any of the other Big Ten games in the bowls. Hit us up on the comments on YouTube. Always love that. No matter if you've watched us all the time or once in a while, if you haven't hit that subscribe button, please go ahead and do it. It's free. And then you get the latest episode of Locked On Big Ten as soon as it becomes available each and every day. And share and like and follow. Plus, don't forget to pick up your Big Ten gear. If you didn't get that special Christmas gift you wanted, maybe you want an Ohio State shirt, maybe you want an Oregon Duck hat, Maybe you want a Penn State pennant. You can get it. We put links right there on our very own website, talkbig10.com. It's where all of our podcasts go chronologically, and we group them by school. And you can go back and catch ones that you missed. And they're all right there, talkbig10.com. But we also have links right there where you could go to your favorite school and order their merchandise. It's right there. It's very easy for you. Talkbig10.com. Feel free to check that out. All right. We're going to talk some more here. Iowa goes bowling today. Kirk Ferentz has a couple of huge coaching milestones in front of him. Nebraska did something it hasn't done since 2015. Rutgers blew its lead in its bowl game, and USC overcame a huge deficit. Let's get caught up on everything that's been going on. Plus, my top 10 Big Ten observations from the weekend. That's all coming up right here as we continue on Locked On Big Ten. Rocket Money is awesome. Let me tell you about it here. It helps you do a lot of things. One of the things it helps you do is keep track of all the subscriptions you have. And you're probably paying twice for a couple of them, to be honest. Rocket Money has made it so easy to track them all down. It's like having a personal assistant for your finances. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that helps find and cancel your unwanted subscriptions, monitors your spending, helps lower your bills so you can grow your savings, and it brings everything together in one place, whether it's subscriptions, your spending habits, even your goals that you want to hit this year. Rocket Money has over 5 million users and has saved a total of $500 million in canceled subscriptions, saving members up to $740 a year when you use all of the app's premium features. So again, it helps you cancel stuff, helps you keep track of stuff, it helps keep you on your goals. Cancel your unwanted subscriptions and reach your financial goals faster with Rocket Money. Go to rocketmoney.com/locked-on today. That's rocketmoney.com/locked-on. rocketmoney.com/locked-on. I want to thank you for making Locked On Big Ten your first listen each and every day, especially you everydayers out there. Meanwhile, be sure to hit that subscribe button down below and share and follow and like Locked On Big Ten, your team every day. And don't forget to check out our website, talkbig10.com. The Iowa Hawkeyes are in action today, and they face the 19th ranked Missouri Tigers in the Music City Bowl. Kickoff is at 2:30 Eastern on ESPN. Those two teams were supposed to play back in 2020. Remember when we had COVID and the game got canceled? The Hawkeyes have they've played in the Music City Bowl as recently as 2022. Kirk Ferentz, apparently a big fan of Nashville and Nissan Stadium, home of the Titans, is a great facility. And he went on to say it's hard to screw up Nashville. So they're having a good time out there. It's all good. Missouri comes into today's game with a 9-3 record. And with a win, they'll have back-to-back 10-win seasons for the third time in school history. Meanwhile, the Hawkeyes, they're coming off a 10-win season the year before, but this year 8-4, still a really good season. And that was following a sluggish 4-3 start. They've won 4 of their last 5 games to get where they're at here this year. And I was struck by the difference between the 2023 Iowa Hawkeyes and the 2024 Iowa Hawkeyes. A lot of it's the same, like minimal production at quarterback, right? Minimal production at quarterback. Virtually no wide receiver involvement, just relying on strong running game and tight ends and playing good defense. It's a winning formula for Kirk Ferentz. And during last year's run to the Big Ten championship game, where they ultimately lost to Michigan, you know, they would struggle just to put 2 scores on the game. If they scored 14 points, it was a high scoring game, but they were winning. It was amazing watching what they were able to do. This year, somehow, the Hawkeyes were able to put up like 40 points in several games. I don't know what was going on, and still had minimal quarterback production. Like a normal game, Cade McNamara would throw for 103 yards, and they would just run the ball, and they'd win, and they put up points. It was remarkable. Speaking of Kirk Ferentz a minute ago, we've got a couple of impressive milestones coming up with this game here today. Let's keep track of this. Number 1, if he wins, he will tie Ohio State legend Woody Hayes for the most wins as a Big Ten coach with 205. So that's on the table. He's 26 years in the league, man. He's been racking up wins. He also has 10 career bowl wins, tying him with Joe Paterno for the most wins among Big Ten coaches. So he gets that. He'll have that record to himself. Now, we mentioned the running game. That would be Caleb Johnson. had a phenomenal year, led the Big Ten in rushing this year. He, and of course, quarterback Cade McNamara, neither of them are going to be playing for the Hawkeyes in this game. McNamara hit the transfer portal. He's gone. Brandon Sullivan will start. He's coming off an ankle injury. And Caleb Johnson, over 1,500 yards this year and 21 touchdowns. And he's declared for the NFL draft. And the Hawkeyes will rely on Kamari Moulton, who averaged 5.4 yards per carry. So they'll just keep with the running game. That'll be the game plan here today. Meanwhile, across the Big Ten, a lot of bowling over the weekend. Let's go back a couple of days because we were recording the podcast at the end of the week last week, right when Rutgers was getting ready to play. And they had a big lead in their bowl game, the Rate Bowl against Kansas State. In fact, Greg Schiano's squad was up 10 points at the half, 17 in the third quarter before losing 44-41, in large part because they couldn't stop the run. Specifically, Dylan Edwards ran for 196 yards and 3 touchdowns on him. And Rutgers' running game usually relies on 2023 Big Ten leading rusher Kyle Monungai, but he's opted out because he's getting ready for the draft. Antoine Raymond carried the ball 18 times for 113 yards. Pretty good there, stepping up. 3 touchdowns. That was great, but it wasn't enough for the win. Still, overall, pretty good season for Rutgers this year, I would say. Then there was the Vegas Bowl, USC versus Texas A&M. And the Trojans capped their season right where it started, right there out in Las Vegas. Remember, they had the season opening win against LSU and had some excitement here. They got down by 17 points. And Jaden Maeva threw a 7-yard touchdown pass to tight end Kyle Ford with 8 seconds to go to give USC a 35-31 win over Texas A&M. And Maeva was just all over the place. Threw for 295 yards, threw 4 touchdown passes, but he threw 3 interceptions. Jacoby Lane had 7 catches for 127 yards and 3 touchdowns. And by the way, we did a preview to this bowl game on this podcast, Lockdown Big Ten. And we talked about the struggles and the lack of direction at USC over the last 2 years. By the way, I stand by those statements. So do you if you follow football at all. But I told you there would be a lot of USC fans that were wrote in and commented, oh, that didn't last long. That didn't age well. I mean, it was a Vegas bowl win. All right. That doesn't fix what has been going on for 2 years there at USC. And clearly, I don't even need to respond because the comments had their own responses from you guys who actually follow football and know what you're talking about. But anyway, thought I'd mention that in the meantime. Pinstripe Bowl. We had Boston College and Nebraska. Nebraska, congratulations to the Huskers for their first bowl win since 2015. They held on, though, to win 20-15. Freshman quarterback Dylan Raiola threw for 228 yards and a touchdown as the Huskers built an 18-point lead. It was like 20-2. They held on for dear life for the win. Dylan Raiola spraying the ball to 10 different receivers in that game. Congratulations to Matt Rule and company. That was a big win for the Huskers, something to build on now going into year 3 of his program. Don't forget this week, tomorrow, we've got the ReliaQuest Bowl with Alabama taking on Michigan. There's the Sun Bowl with Louisville and Washington. By the way, Washington hired Eric Bieniemy, the former Chiefs and Washington Commanders offensive coordinator. He was at UCLA this year. Things didn't go great there at UCLA. He got fired. Washington picking him up as an offensive consultant. There's the Citrus Bowl with South Carolina taking on the Illinois Fighting Illini. And then our playoff games, the Penn State Boise State game in the Fiesta Bowl on New Year's Eve and the Rose Bowl New Year's Day with Ohio State and Oregon. Looking forward to all of that action right here. We'd love to hear you on the comments on all these bowl games. Hit me up with the comments on YouTube. We'll talk about that. And coming up, I always enjoy this. It is time for my top 10 Big Ten observations from the weekend. That's coming up next right here on Locked On Big Ten. If you're new to our podcast, we always have a feature here near the end of the podcast, depending on the day of the week. Mondays, we always like to do top 10 Big Ten observations from the weekend. Tuesday tweets. Follow us on Twitter at Talk Big Ten or X if you prefer. We'll have a power rankings in the middle of the week. Thursday, we look ahead to Big Ten Network programming with Big Ten Classics, live action, all that stuff they have there. And then we make our picks, pigskin picks. So we'll do basketball picks on Fridays. We always have a bunch of fun with that. All right, let's put it on the screen. If you are audio only, that's fine. That's cool. We got a lot of people that just listen on audio. We'll put this on screen and we'll describe in detail. No particular order. I've kind of grouped these together. Just a shout out to Rutgers, Robert Longerbeam, who had an interception in their game against Kansas State in the Rate Bowl. I always like to give a shout out to defensive plays. Let's see what else we got here. Also want to put up Rutgers' Ian Strong, 5 catches, 105 yards in that game against Kansas State. And then want to mention Antoine Raymond with 18 carries and 113 yards, 3 touchdowns in that game in the Rate Bowl against Kansas State in for Kyle Monangai, who was sitting out. So shout out to these guys at Rutgers for what they did. Got another grouping here. Shout out to Nebraska. In their Pinstripe Bowl win over Boston College. Ramir Johnson, he was the MVP. Now he rushed 10 times for 60 yards. You may go, well, is that MVP? It was his final game for Nebraska. And by the way, his mom died in November. And so he came out and played admirably, and he got the MVP. So kind of the human element along with production on the football field. So what a tough, bittersweet time that is for him. And meanwhile, I put it right in there in our top 10 observations. So number 6, just Nebraska getting a bowl win. Back in the winning bowl. Wait, they haven't won a bowl game since 2015. Taking that Pinstripe Bowl. And they finished with a winning record. That's 7-6. Again, congratulations. I think, obviously, with the excitement of Dylan Raiola, and we'll see with the new offensive coordinator, Dana Holgorsen, going into next year with a full off season. They got the big wide receiver transfer from Kentucky. This is a team. Maybe I was a little early on them. I said, hey, look out. This is going to be the sleeper hot team this year. Look, they had a winning record. It was a fun season. Maybe I was a year early in my prediction. It's coming. I think good things are happening for the Huskers. All right, elsewhere in our top 10 observations for the weekend, we're at number 5. USC Kamari Ramsey got an interception in that game. And also, that wasn't the only one because Achille Arnold had one for USC and had a 26-yard return on the end of that as well. Then there was Jacoby Lane. Well, the receiver's still there. 7 catches, 127 yards, and 3 touchdowns in the Las Vegas Bowl against Texas A&M. And I'd want to give an overall shout out, my top 10 Big Ten observations. Just USC scoring 21 points in the fourth quarter. At one point down 17 points in this game. And they had the big 75-yard drive where they scored in the final seconds. That was great. That was great execution. Lincoln Riley and his whole team coming through. That was pretty good. You got to give that a shout out. And then Jade Maeva. Again, 3 interceptions for the day. Maybe a little high here at number 1. Again, this isn't a real particular order, but he did throw the winning touchdown with 8 seconds to go to tight end Kyle Ford. So I wanted to give him a shout out there. Pretty impressive. So those are my top 10 Big Ten observations for the weekend. Did I miss anything? Let me know. Hit me up in the comments. I always appreciate that. But there they are. One last look. Our top 10 Big Ten observations from the weekend. Let me know what you think. All right. In the meantime, tomorrow, a couple things. We're going to continue doing a deep dive into Oregon versus Ohio State. We'll do something on that every day. We'll look at the Penn State game coming up against Boise, because that'll be a day away. We'll look at what happened with Iowa and their bowl game, and Kirk Ferentz. Will they be celebrating him being the all-time winningest coach of the Big Ten or not? So we got a lot to do. This is a very, very busy week. Thank you for joining us. And a lot of ways for you to stay involved with this podcast. You can interact with me at Twitter or X at Talk Big Ten. Comments on YouTube are the best. Check those every day, and I love the back and forth. Let's get a little more Oregon versus Ohio State trash talking going, because that's always fun. We definitely want to do that. And don't forget our website, talkbig10.com, the number 10, talkbig10.com. All of our podcasts go there. This one will go there as soon as it's done. If you want to catch up on something, and if you want to buy some merchandise from your favorite team, get some shirts, t-shirts, and hats, school spirit, something you didn't get for Christmas, go right there, talkbig10.com. That's the number 10, talkbig10.com. No matter what you've done or haven't done, if you could, hit the subscribe button down below. Just click, boom, that's it. It's free It will always be free. It doesn't require any personal information. And that way you can follow this podcast right now on your favorite podcast app. You get the latest episode of Locked On Big Ten as soon as it becomes available each and every day. Plenty more football to talk about tomorrow. So thank you for joining us here today. Always appreciate it. For Locked On Big Ten, I'm Craig Sheeman. Talk to you tomorrow.